wheels and about V-twin, 4-cylinder, press together cranks, what we're working against, what we're working with, and how it's a challenge for anybody that builds hot rod Harleys or hot rod Suzukis. Can y'all hear me okay? Hey Ronnie, Jim Bob, Mike Wagner, Stroker Cranks, Mark, Freddie, hey buddy. If y'all hear me okay, give me a shout out, okay? Robert Dale, Larry, hello, hey GB, JB, looks like we're gonna be stroking. This is about Suzuki's, Kawasaki's, Harleys, all pressed together crankshafts versus forged one-piece cranks like we have in some engines have forged one-piece cranks, which are really nice. Loud and clear, Ronnie, thank you, I hear you. Okay, 10-4. All right, we're a little bit past the top of the hour, so it looks like I can get into this now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you real quick about the different designs and about what we've been dealing with and what we've learned, because we don't build the crankshafts here. We have our crankshaft assemblies, flywheel assemblies. We use some S&S flywheel assemblies, but our go-to guys they're in Ellsworth, Maine. It's GRC and Gardner Racing Concepts. GRC. You guys look them up when you get finished. Don't look them up right now. You're busy right now. But when you get through watching Tech Talk Tuesday, go look them up and you'll see why I use them. But they're all these trophies and all these wins and all the world records and all the stuff that we won along the way have the GRC prepared crankshafts in them. Even when we would get them from the other companies, we would have to send them to Stanley and the boys at GRC to go through and blueprint them and get the clearances like we wanted them. A lot of times we had a hard time getting flywheel manufacturing, the companies that would make the parts, they wouldn't build to the clearances we wanted or the clearances we thought we wanted. So you and me and all of us watching, we're all kind of hung up on or stuck on what we can buy. And there's a lot of things that are dictated by the manufacturer of the parts. And when you deal with the Harley-Davidson Motor Company and Suzuki and Kawasaki, the factories, I don't know how they got away with it, but they did all these years, is they run zero clearance. You go buy a brand new set of flywheels from Suzuki or a brand new set from Harley-Davidson. And when I'm talking about the Suzuki, I'm talking about the old GS 1150s, the KZs, KZ900, KZ1000s. Those are all pressed together cranks that we always send them off to get them trued and welded. Now, what I mean by zero clearance is they would get a rod pin like this. This is a rod pin. And they would have a flywheel pressed on here and a flywheel pressed on here, and right here is where the connecting rod would run. And if it's a connecting rod like we have in the Harleys, where the female, this is the rear rod, and this is the male, which is the front rod. This clearance, this machined in here from the rod manufacturer, Carrillo, CP, S&S, whoever makes the rods, and this measurement right here is set by those companies, and then this clearance right in here is set by the manufacturer. And if you don't put enough clearance right here, you're going to run hot and it's going to burn up. Now, the only way I know how to increase this clearance here without reinventing the wheel is to actually face these off on each side and make this skinnier in here so that it has more room to move. Okay? The problem with this design is, well, first of all, it's very RPM limited, and the rear rod has two sets of bearings, a left and a right. These are the cages, I'm sorry. These are the cages for the left and the right of this female rod. This would go in here, and this would go in here, and that is what supports the rear rod. It has a lot of lateral stability because they're spaced apart. The problem we have with the front rod is it has this one cage. So therefore, it's sitting here wobbling around on one cage and one roller. So the front roller is this big, this wide. And guess how many rollers are in the front rod? Stanley Gardner at GRC just told me There's 19 rollers in the front rod, and there's 19 rollers on the left side of the rear rod and 19 rollers on the right side of the rear rod. So therefore, all these guys get used up. The two rear cages, the front cage, and these are all the rollers that go in there. Now, when I say they have zero clearance, that means that this is honed to the same size as this pin, this diameter of this pin, plus the diameter of this roller, plus the diameter of this roller, added together like this, equals the same measurement that's in here. That means zero clearance. Now, you're talking about something that'll run hot, generate some heat. It starts burning up the thrust washers on the sides. It starts burning up the cheeks of the flywheel. They got slots here to try and get lubrication to them. This one got overheated. We changed this out, of course, but this one burned up. It broke. This one burned up. It got too hot. And this cage broke. Let's see, this race, I'm sorry. This race, yeah, it's broken. You can see in there, this race is broken. And it was too tight, and it got too hot. Now, on our race engines and our high-performance street engines, we honed these out to our clearance, and we've been sneaking up on it. We've gone a little bit too big, and we've gone a little bit too little, but we settled in somewhere where GRC builds the cranks now. They set them at between 18 tenths and 20 tenths of a thou clearance. Think about this. The factory crankshaft, when you go buy a brand new Screaming Eagle crank from Harley Davidson for your M8 or for your twin cam, it comes at -2 tenths clearance to +2 tenths clearance. That's 0.002 tenths minus. That means that's a press fit. I don't know how they expected to press those bearings, those rollers in here with this cage and get this pin in here at 0 without generating heat. I just think it's a mistake. So Stanley and the boys at GRC, they honed this out to where we have 1.8 clearance or 2 clearance, 2 thou, 18 tenths or 20 tenths clearance, so that the bore is 2 thousandths bigger than the pin plus the rollers. That's a little bit too hard to handle. I understand, I'm sorry. But I want to tell you a little bit more about it. This right here shows how the knife and fork goes together, or the male and the female, or the front and rear rod, rear and the front. They both have, every bearing has 19 rollers. 19 on the front rod, 19 on the left of the rear, and 19 on the right of the rear. Okay, everybody got that? And this rod in the center is pivoting on one set of rollers, whereas this rod has got support on both sides, so it has less wiggle. This one has to have wiggle, and if you put it in 0 clearance like the factory wants you to do, as soon as you rev it up, okay, the factory, what's the rev limiter now on them? 5,500, 5,000, 100 mile an hour, 110, that's like the fastest you can go now. And the factory wants you to stay lower on RPM because they want to set them up tight. Hopefully they'll last a long time. And the reason they want you to drive it slow for a long time is because the flywheel's too tight. It has 0 clearance, and they're afraid that it's going to seize up. We bought pro stock cranks, billet cranks for our pro stock Suzukis, took them apart, measured everything, and they were set up too close to 0, and those will burn up. And I heard back in the day, even the Vance and Hines guys would say, there's 10 horsepower on a good crankshaft. And I'm like, well, if it's got all the right clearances and it's got all the right sizes, there should be no horsepower difference between the cranks. But if you got one that's set up tight, and the hotter it gets, let me tell you about, when you get something this hot, you can't imagine what kind of fire it takes to turn this blue. I mean, you know what kind of fire it takes to turn a piece of steel blue? That generates a lot of heat. And of course, this poor guy doesn't have a chance. You got one set of rollers running on the rear rod, one set of rollers running on the rear rod, but then you got the little rollers down the center for the male rod, for the front rod. Okay, I've been flying that around for a while, and It's probably time to land that airplane. But the Pro Stock cranks that we're using today in the NHRA, S&S makes, these big flywheels, okay? When we first started the S&S Pro Stock, let me find, there's one right here. This is one, okay. This guy right here. This was a flywheel. This is a flywheel. This is a pinion shaft that's pressed in. That's what this dotted line's for. This sprocket shaft is pressed in. So they would weld it here. They would weld it here. And then this rod pin is pressed in through this flywheel, pressed in at interference fit, a thou or something, 2, and then welded here, and then pressed into this flywheel and welded here. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces plus a 2-piece rod. Now, if you can make this pressed together with 5 pieces and get the dial indicator to run here and here, or here and here, and have 1 thou run out, that means that you haven't ever run the crankshaft before. That means it's static. And static means sitting on the table, and dynamic means in the running engine. So this is what we found running 10,000 RPM, 11,000 RPM on the V-twin 160 cubic inch S&S engines, that the flywheels are doing this while it's running. This guy's waving around, this guy's waving around, and we flexed them so many times that the rod pin would break in the center and it would snap the crank in half. The rods, the billet aluminum rods and the Carrillo rods would last longer than this crank pin. So S&S was building race cranks with a 1.25 pin, 1 1/4 diameter. So on their new Pro Stock stuff in the late or early 2000s, so the beginning of the millennium, they went to a 1.5 diameter pin, which is really nice. It's a bigger diameter pin. It reduced the flex. And then when the twin cam came out, they went to a 1.710 from 99 to 16 or 17. And then when the Milwaukee 8 came out, they increased that another 100 thou to a 1-inch 810. That's why I say, here George says, that the Milwaukee 8 crankshaft is the strongest of any of these. And I'm going to explain to you why in a minute. If you had 2 big flywheels and a 1 1/4 shaft holding those flywheels together, 1 1/4 diameter, and you're running this as hard as it'll go, and the flywheels are doing this crank pin in the middle, the rod sit on breaks. So you have to put a bigger one in there. All right, well then we started running the engine so hard that this crank pin would break. And then Harley got smart and decided, well, if we're going to do it, let's put a bigger crank pin in, which adds a ton of stability to this assembly. Please understand, most engines do not have a crankshaft or flywheel assembly. To me, this is a crankshaft, but the Harley guys call them flywheels. Well, this is a flywheel, this is a flywheel, this is not a flywheel, this is not a flywheel. But when you put this in here and you put this on here and then this napkin full of garbage right here, this is a flywheel assembly. No, it's not. It's a crankshaft assembly, in my opinion. And that makes me want to stop right here and go back and tell you something. Look, I don't build crankshafts. I'm not a crankshaft expert, okay? I got a lot of miles on me, and I got a lot of miles on my shop from tearing up this stuff. We blew up more cranks, and we blew up more pistons, and we blew up more heads and valves and springs and cams and gears and stuff than most anybody has, because when you try to break the chain and break the crank and break the rods and the pistons and the valves for 45 years in a row, you're going to learn a lot, because either you're going to quit or you're going to learn enough to try and figure out how to drive around some of those parts, because we ran over more parts. And I see Rob Flynn's on here. His team's run over a lot of parts in his day too. A lot of nitro blowing through those guys. But what I wanted to tell you is when you increase this pin, imagine, if you will, if we went from 1 1/4 to 1 1/2, you can see that this whole assembly gets stronger. And then why not put, like the new Milwaukee 8, why not go to 1.8? Doesn't it look like it would be more stable and have more strength? As soon as you get big enough, though, this is what happens to us. As soon as we get this big enough where these flywheels don't flex anymore, the distance around this circle is so far that these little guys are trying to catch up. And then when there's a small pin, like an 1.25 inch pin that S&S and Harley started off with, these little rollers would spin at a speed that would suit them, and the oil and the clearances. But as soon as we get bigger with these pins, this little roller has to travel more distance in the same amount of time. So this little guy gets hotter and hotter and hotter until he turns red. And the reason I know about that now is because why not put a 2-inch pin in here? Because if you put a 2-inch pin in here, now you got a top fuel crank or a Hemi. I think they're a 2.5. I think nitro cars are running a 2.5 pin. But they don't run roller bearings, y'all. If they ran roller bearings on a 2.5 pin and turned it 10,000 RPM or 9,000 RPM, this little dude right here would catch on fire trying to keep up. And I wanted to finish by saying these, not finish, but I just want to add into this story that this is my opinion. I am not a crank builder. I don't have, I mean, I got Stanley Gardner on speed dial at GRC. He helps me on one too. And also the guys at S&S help me. And I have competitors up and down both coasts and that have been doing this for a long time, and they know all about these flywheels. But look, you guys, we are definitely helping set RPM records, horsepower records, mile an hour records, and even our Pro Stock bike still is really fast. We still have a good number from 6.730 at 199 miles an hour from 3 or 4 years ago when we were turning over 10,000 RPM with this crankshaft. Okay, I want you to see this crank right here. This is a flywheel assembly. GRC built it for us. It has 8-inch long billet aluminum rods. It's pressed together here and welded. This pinion shaft is pressed in and welded. This is not pressed in and welded. This is a one piece. But this guy here, this is on a 1.5 pin. It has the rollers here and the rollers here and the rollers here. And if you put this together right, where you can stand it, you see this front one, it has a little bit of play to it so that when it gets hot and when it turns a lot of RPM, there's room to grow and there's room for oil to get to it. A stock crankshaft that's in the Harley manual, and they put the Harley, when you get to a Harley Tech or a Harley shop where the guy measures everything based on the book, it has these clearances here, and they also tell you that the runout can be 11 thou on the pinion shaft. So that means the pinion shaft is waving out here, this thing. Now the early twin cam, let me turn this around and make y'all real dizzy. The early twin cam, S&S flywheel assembly. Here's one unhooked so you can see it. This has a new pinion shaft in it. Okay? It's pressed in. So this is 2 pieces. And you can see how heavy the opposite side of the rods are. Forgive me for flopping around. Here's the drive side. It has the main sprocket shaft is also pressed in. Now when you buy a new billet crank from S&S, you get a 3-piece crank. That means that this is all one piece. It's got the drive shaft is made onto this flywheel. It means that the pinion shaft is made onto this flywheel. You can see this is 1.5 pin, like we used on the Pro Stockers. 1.5. Now the stroke is from the center of this shaft to the center of this shaft. That's the stroke, times 2. If this is 2 inches from here to here, when it goes all the way around over here, that's 4 inches. So a 4-inch stroke crank, the piston goes up 2 inches and down 2 inches to get a total of 4 inches. Now, go back around so I can show you about this Pro Stock crank. If you look at this view of this Pro Stock crank right here, can you see the overlap here? From the main to the rod pin. They're a little bit overlapping. A stroker crank will have a higher, longer stroke will have this pin up here, and it will have more leverage. It will have more leverage. So the closer you can keep this pin to the center of the flywheel assembly, the more strength you have. You may have heard of Jaska Salakari from Finland. He has like a 3.5 stroke or a 3 1/4 stroke crank in his top fuel V-twin nitro. But let me tell you about his crank. It's all one piece. He has no press together or anything. He's got the big Hemi rod pin, and it overlaps into where his clutch mounts, and it overlaps on his cam drive. So he has this much overlap. This is hard to bend because in physics, when you have this much overlap, this is almost like a straight piece. Let's make it a straight piece so it makes sense. Let's do a 0-stroke crank. It has a pinion, it has a drive, and it has a rod. That's a 0-stroke crank. Hard to bend, no offset. Then when you go up to a 5-inch stroke, well, the 1.25 pin, look at the leverage we have. Back to the run out. The run out. When they put the indicator on these two shafts, dial indicator on this one, dial indicator on this one, and you're checking how the ends are waving, okay? When this is put together and this is pressed together and then it's welded, it is dead straight. This is 0 run out, this is 0 run out, and all this is perfectly aligned and true. As soon as you beat it up, as soon as you rev it up, as soon as you put it on the dyno, as soon as you go down the drag strip, floor it, pop the clutch, put some power to it, put some RPM to it, and then you got these rods and big 5-inch pistons are trying to shove this in through the middle, and it flexes these. It flexes them so hard that when you switch the bike off or switch the engine off, they're not going to be straight anymore because the dynamic shape was different than the static state. If any of you guys ever race cars, you put them on the scales and you put corner weights in the car for running on the circle track or the drag strip. You do static weight measurement, static weight adjustment in order to get the results you want in a dynamic state. The static, you put scales on the ground, put the car on there, and you put corner weight. You see them on NASCAR. They put the wedge winch in the back window, and they put a rounder wedge in it, or they take a round out. And what they're doing is they're putting preload into the springs, so they're changing the weight. The pressure of the car so that they get the shape and the level they want at speed. That's a dynamic result of a static adjustment. So when we make these cranks perfectly straight in the shop or in assembly or before we put the engine together, we want these to be 1 thou. Then when we run them, all of them change. This one right here, service limit on this one was 10 thou. We would run this as hard as we could, and at the end of the racing, take it home and measure it, and this would be 10 thou out. But there still wouldn't be anything wrong with it other than we're not happy with the number because we looked it up in the Harley-Davidson book that said, well, theirs is 11 thou. But there's guys racing out there that have taken engines that have a lot of miles on them and a lot of horsepower and taken them apart, and they got more run out than that. And run out is such a bad word right now because it makes or breaks a job. Not how much horsepower it makes, not how fast it goes. It's because of the results of these 5 pieces. These 5 pieces pressed together. This is pressed, this is pressed, this is pressed, this is pressed, and this is pressed. And all 5 of these pieces are put together with 30 tons and then welded all in one piece, and it's still a flexible flyer. Does it make any sense, guys, so far? All right. Timken bearings. I don't know what year Harley stopped putting Timkens on. Maybe it was 02, 03, 04, something like that. But we don't use Timken bearings at Star Racing. That's what they used to have back in the day. A Timken bearing was how they located the crankshaft left or right in the engine. S&S still sells engines with Timken bearing conversions. There's a lot of shops that do a great job putting Timken bearing in them. But this is the best V-twin crankshaft we've ever run, and we make 400 horsepower and turn it over 10,000 RPM, and it's never seen a Timken bearing. It has a roller here and a roller here, and the only thing that sets the clearance in the engine is the stuff, the gear and the washers and all the parts bolted to this side, just like your Milwaukee 8. Your Milwaukee 8 is put together with a 3-piece crank, and it does not come with a Timken bearing. Now, since they came in Timken bearings came in the old Harleys, and they quit putting them in the Harleys back 02, 04. I can't remember what year it was. Somebody's going to tell me. 03, thank you, Jimmy. In 03, they went to the rollers on both sides. Well, guess what? There was so many more things wrong with this. It wasn't the bearing's fault. This was all pressed together wrong. They were loose, they twisted, and they needed to be welded, and they were really poor. So when you put just because you have a poor flywheel assembly that's put together wrong and it's really crooked and it twists, just by putting a Timken bearing in it didn't fix it. All it did was make the bearing back like it was a long time ago. I just want y'all to know that they have not made a twin cam or a Milwaukee 8 in 15 years minimum with a Timken bearing, and we just don't use them. They're really, really slow speed bearings. It has an angularity to it. There's a left one that pulls this way and a left one that pulls this way, and you have to preload them against races to work against each other to locate the crank on center. And if you try to turn that more RPM than your competition, you're going to generate more heat. So please, George Bryce at Star Racing is not complaining about the people that install Timken bearings. It's a great job. They do a great job. They have all these great gyms, has these kits, and S&S has kits, and I see all these guys sell kits to put Timken bearings in your bike. But if you call me up and ask me or send me an email and say, George, I'm building a 200 horsepower Milwaukee 8. I want to run in the 9s and I want to ride it. Do I need a Timken bearing? I'll say, no. We don't put them in there. Now, yes, I have some S&S engines that are fast with Timken bearings, but the fastest engine S&S has ever made on gasoline has never had Timken bearings in it. There's one right there. It won't help you, in my opinion. If you got something wrong with your crank or your flywheel assembly, it's going to be something other than the roller bearings, because we use, I got to say it one more time, this crankshaft right here uses the Screaming Eagle factory Harley-Davidson black bearing right here. 11,000 RPM. Same bearing that comes in your twin cam, the same bearing that comes in your Milwaukee 8 goes right here on this crank. And this side has also a roller ball bearing on this side, but no thrusting bearings at all. I see that my time is up. I see that there are going to be many questions, and I circled the airplane around this crankshaft airfield for 30 minutes, and I don't know if I made any good points, but I sure rambled. These are my opinions, not everybody else's. There are great companies I compete with. There's great companies that I deal with. Dark Horse puts Timken bearings on. GRC puts Timken bearings on. S&S puts Timken bearings on. That's all good. Thank you all for doing that. Y'all do a great job. If you want one, do it. But I don't sell them. I don't use them. If your engine comes here and we take it apart and it has a Timken bearing and it looks beautiful, we'll use it again. But we do not do the conversions here. But I'm not bad-mouthing the people that do them, okay? It's just like some engines don't need roller rock arms. And you can still make 200 horsepower with stock rock arms. But roller rock arms cost $500 and something, and Timken bearing conversions cost a lot, and I don't use them unless I need them. And if I don't need them, a lot of times you don't need them. There's a lot of ways to spend your money on things that don't help you or run better or make you have more longevity. And I'm not going to talk about balancing or not, because that's another whole story. But if you have any questions about crankshafts or assembly or clearances, I have just given you a 30-minute opinion of mine, okay? Call Stanley, Cullen, or the guys at GRC. They can answer your questions. Call John at Dark Horse. He can answer your questions. But I buy the stuff that makes us get these. That's it. All of these had GRC cranks in them, every one of them. I told him, I said, there's a free commercial for you, Stanley, that you've already bought and paid for dearly. But thank you all so much. Appreciate you guys watching, tuning in. I hope you'll share this with others, and I really need the feedback. I need you guys to write me back and tell me what you like or what you don't like, and let me modify this accordingly. I'm a very opinionated person, but I'm not mad at other people that do it their way. This is just how we do it. And we have a lot going on in our shop. The engine building room here is slap packed full. There's a lot happening, and we're thankful for it. And y'all tune in for another day. And take care of each other, y'all. May God bless y'all. Thank y'all for watching. And tune in next week and ask me questions. Amen.